This happened about 7 years ago, fittingly on Halloween night. It was late, close to midnight. All the kids from the neighborhood had long gone home, their plastic pumpkins emptied, their costumes tossed aside. Even the neighbors across the street had finally turned off that cheesy Halloween sound tape, the one with the creaking doors and witch cackles that looped endlessly until it was more irritating than spooky. The house had gone still. Just me and my cousin Q sat in the living room, the silence settling over us like a thick blanket. My other cousin, who was around 4 at the time, had left her doll on the floor, face down, arms awkwardly splayed. It was one of those baby alive dolls, the kind with eyelids that open and shut on their own. You know the type. Meant to be cute, but there was always something off about it. Q hated that doll from the second it arrived in the house. She said it creeped her out. She couldn't even stand to look at it. She used to throw it down the basement stairs whenever she got the chance, like she couldn't get it far enough away from her. I never had a problem with it, so it stayed there on the living room floor, right where my little cousin had left it. She'd pick it up again in the morning. It had been quiet for about 30 minutes. Nothing but the low hum of the refrigerator and the occasional click of Q's fingers tapping away on her keyboard. Then we heard it, a harsh, rasping shuffle, like something dragging across concrete just outside the front window. It sounded like a man, an old man, right outside. I turned to Q. She looked back at me, her expression unreadable. "Did you hear that?" She barely glanced away from her screen. Probably the neighbor's tape again. Then she went right back to typing. The silence returned, but it only lasted a minute. The rasping came again, louder this time, close. And now I was sure I heard something beneath it, a voice. Someone was trying to speak, but it came out garbled, like wet cloth being dragged across their mouth. I stood up and crossed the room to the window, pressing my fingers gently against the glass. The street was empty, not a single soul in sight. The neighbor's porch light was off, their windows were dark, dead still. "There's no one out there," I said, glancing over my shoulder at Q. She didn't respond. Something about the air felt wrong, too quiet, too heavy, like the night was holding its breath. Then we heard it, whispering. Not soft, accidental murmurs, but sharp, deliberate whispers, loud enough to cut through the silence. And they weren't from one voice, but 2. One sounded like a child, the other like a woman. The tone wasn't urgent, it wasn't kind, it was intrusive, like the voices knew we were listening. Q froze, her hands hovering above her keyboard. Her eyes flicked toward the doll. "It's that doll," she muttered. Of course she'd say that. Q was always superstitious, the kind who would throw salt over her shoulder or refuse to sleep with mirrors uncovered. I shot her a skeptical look. "Seriously?" I sighed. For the record, I've never believed in the paranormal. I figured she was just trying to spook me. Still, I leaned down and picked up the doll. It was fine. Its plastic eyes were shut. Nothing unusual. I should probably mention this doll had a voice box, one of those things that says baby phrases, but it didn't have any batteries in it. None. We'd taken them out a week ago because it kept going off on its own. I set it back down. "No, it's not. Just leave it alone," I told her. Q didn't argue. The silence thickened again, wrapping around us like fog. Then came the rasping again, but this time it was different. It wasn't just dragging or shuffling, there was speech in it. Garbled words spilling out of a voice that sounded like it hadn't been used in years, followed by wheezing, labored, wheezy breaths like something barely clinging to life. I shot up from the couch, my chest tightening. "I'm checking the backyard," I said, already moving. As I stepped toward the hallway, I stopped. Something caught my eye. The doll had moved. It wasn't where I left it. I turned back, heart skipping. It was on its back now, not face down, eyes wide open, glossy and vacant. But what chilled me more was the weight. When I picked it up again, it felt heavier, unnaturally so, like something inside it had changed. Without a word, I dropped it. Q was already on her feet. She didn't hesitate. She snatched the doll off the floor and flung it down the basement stairs. I heard it tumble down the wooden steps, each bounce thudding like a heartbeat. We didn't talk after that, just sat there, staring at the dark hallway, listening, waiting. My cousin denies it ever happened now, says I imagined it, but I know what I saw. And strangely, the little one, the one who loved that doll, she never asked about it again, not once. I only saw the doll once more, weeks later. It was lying at the top of the basement stairs, just resting there on its side, as if it had climbed up and was waiting. This time, I didn't touch it. I gave it one solid push with my foot and sent it tumbling back into the dark. I was up late reading one night. The kind of cold, bone-deep night where every corner of the house feels just a little too still. My bedroom's on the first floor, tucked into the back of a modest home nestled in a quiet, wooded area. I live alone. Because it's so remote, and because there's rarely anyone passing by, I never bothered putting blinds on most of my windows. There never seemed to be a reason. I liked the open view, waking up to sunlight spilling into my room, illuminating the wood floorboards in golden streaks. But that night made me regret that choice more than anything. After I finally shut off my reading lamp and laid my head down, there was nothing but silence. A deep, heavy quiet that lingered for about 2 minutes, just long enough for my thoughts to begin drifting, before I heard it. A sound, a distinct tap against the glass. Not a random creak, not the wind. It sounded unmistakably like a fist, a single deliberate knock. A human fist striking the window pane behind me. I was lying with my back to the window, and in that moment, I didn't want to turn around. I've lived there long enough to know the natural sounds. Tree branches brushing the siding, the occasional creak of the deck. But this wasn't that. I knew the sound of a branch. This was blunt, controlled, too heavy. A fist on glass. My heart tightened. The idea that someone could be outside my window, staring in, watching me, it made the air feel suddenly colder. I told myself it could have been a branch, tried to force the logic in. Maybe a stray limb hit just right, just once. But then it came again. Another knock, one and only one. And this time, there was no mistaking it. Someone was out there. I laid perfectly still, every muscle in my body tense. Maybe, just maybe, it was a prank. Some idiot trying to spook someone on Halloween. If I didn't move, didn't react, maybe they'd think I was asleep and just leave. The third knock shattered that illusion. Still single, still deliberate. I clenched my jaw, trying not to breathe too loudly, hoping that if I gave no reaction, they'd get bored. But when the fourth knock came, same pattern, same chilling rhythm, I snapped. I'd had enough. No more hiding. I turned toward the window, adrenaline pushing me upright, and just as I moved, I caught a glimpse, a shadow, a shape, dark, human-shaped, swiftly ducking beneath the window frame. It was gone in an instant, and with it, every ounce of courage I had. My hands trembling, I bolted from the room and ran straight to the kitchen. The phone was on the wall, and I snatched it like it was a lifeline. I punched in 911 and told them someone was outside my house, knocking on my windows, staring in. They said they'd dispatch an officer right away. ETA, about 10 minutes. I hung up, heart pounding, and caught movement in the corner of my eye. I turned, my skin went cold. Someone was standing outside my kitchen window, watching me. He didn't move. He just stood there, his face obscured by the reflection, by the night, but I felt him staring straight through the glass, through me. It lasted only a second, because the moment I made eye contact, he turned and took off, vanished into the darkness. I stumbled back, struggling to breathe. That's when the phone rang again. It was my neighbor, also my best friend. His voice was shaking. He told me he'd just looked out his own window and saw 3 people walking onto my property, dressed in black. One of them, he said, was holding something sharp. It caught the moonlight. That was it. I was done. I sprinted upstairs, knowing it was the only part of the house without ground-level windows. I locked myself in the bathroom and just waited, my ears strained in the silence. Then came the knocking. Not on the window this time, but at the front door. Single knocks, spaced out, just like before. There was no way that was the cops. I sat on the tiled floor, frozen, every second dragging like an hour. I didn't breathe. I didn't move. I just prayed. And then, salvation. A sudden, violent pounding at the front door, much heavier, urgent, followed by shouting, "Police, open up!" Relief hit like a wave. I rushed downstairs and let them in, nearly collapsing from the shock. But the 3 intruders, if there were only 3, were already gone. They'd vanished into the trees. The woods swallowed them. The police searched the property, combed the area, found nothing. No footprints they could trace, no sign of anyone. They were never caught. And to this day, I still don't know who they were or what they wanted. But I do know one thing. I bought blinds that same week, and I haven't slept without them closed since. My parents were divorced, so I was living with my dad at the time. Being an only child, I didn't have any siblings to keep me company. The only chance I had to be around other kids was when I went out and tried making friends on my own. There was this one kid who lived at the corner of our block. His name was Tom. I met him one afternoon while I was riding my bike. He was standing on his driveway, spinning a basketball in his hand, and without much of an introduction, he invited me over to shoot some hoops with him. I said yes. It was strange, though. He was a lot older than me. I was 12 and he was 16. But he didn't seem to mind the age gap. In fact, he acted like we were the same. After hanging out with him a few times, I found out he was also an only child and lived with his dad, just like I did. That made him seem kind of relatable at first. We started hanging out more. I gave him my phone number, and he'd call sometimes to ask if I wanted to come over, or if he could come to my place to play video games. But then, gradually, he started to get weird. He began calling non-stop. If I didn't answer, he'd leave these irritated, passive-aggressive voicemails. 5 or 6 calls in a row. Then, if I still didn't respond, he'd show up, ringing the doorbell over and over until someone came to the door. If my dad was home, he'd always answer, and despite my protests, he'd make me hang out with Tom. I kept trying to explain that the guy was creepy, but my dad just thought he was a little awkward, maybe lonely. One day, Tom and I were biking together back toward his house, and I was doing my best to tune out the constant stream of nonsense coming out of his mouth. He would just ramble, non-stop. He never shut up. And at that point, I was actively thinking of ways to get him to stop coming around. I needed to break it off. That's when, for the first time, he invited me into his house. I really didn't want to go. Something in my gut told me not to. But he was already unlocking the front door and waving me inside. And somehow, it felt like I didn't have a choice. The second I stepped through the threshold, I was hit by a smell so thick and putrid it nearly made me gag. Like rotting food, old laundry, and something worse beneath it all. The inside of the house was a wreck, clothes strewn across the floor, broken glass glinting in a corner, and weird brown stains on the walls that looked like spilled coffee or something else. It was the filthiest place I'd ever been in. Then, a massive figure stepped out from one of the back rooms. A man. Tom's dad. He loomed in the doorway, staring at me with a cold, intimidating glare that made my blood run cold. His eyes didn't blink. He didn't smile. I instinctively took a step back until Tom quickly introduced him. "That's my dad." The man gave a low grunt, then turned and disappeared down the hall. That was it. I was done. Everything about this place, about them, felt wrong. I made up some excuse, fumbling over my words, said I forgot I had a doctor's appointment or something, and started backing toward the door. That's when Tom's smile vanished. His face changed completely. His eyes darkened, his jaw clenched. He didn't say a word, just stared at me with this silent, eerie rage simmering just beneath the surface. I didn't wait for him to say anything. I just turned and bolted down the block, pedaling home as fast as I could. When I got to my front door, I was surprised to find it locked. My heart dropped for a moment, but I remembered the key my dad made me carry. I let myself in and immediately looked around. The house was empty. I found a sticky note on the fridge. "Called into work. Storm emergency. Be home late." Great. I was on edge the whole evening, but eventually I sat down to check my email, waiting on a response from someone about an eBay listing. Instead, I had 5 new emails, all from the same address, tomtom20@aol.com. My heart dropped. I never gave him my email. And yet, there they were, emails in all capital letters. The subject lines were chilling. "You made a mistake. I know where you live." The others were just filled with slurs, threats, and curses. Violent, unhinged. The kind of things that made my stomach twist into knots. I was only 12. I was shaking as I stood up, heading for the kitchen phone to call my dad. But then I heard something. Rustling. Outside. The bushes just beneath the window. I moved slowly toward the blinds, a terrible feeling pooling in my gut. I lifted one corner and peeked through, and froze. A face stared back at me. Huge, pale, stubbled jaw, cold, dead eyes. Tom's dad. Right there, pressed against the window glass. I stumbled back, gasping, and immediately called the police. My voice was shaking. I could barely get the words out. By the time they arrived, he was gone. No sign of him, no footprints, no car, nothing. When my dad got home, having been alerted by dispatch, he didn't say a word. He just gave me a hug. Then the next morning, we went straight to file a restraining order. Tom and his dad moved out of the neighborhood about a month later. I don't know why. I don't know where they went. But to this day, I still wonder, how did he get my email? And what would have happened if I had stayed in that house even a minute longer? I moved into a house that my aunt and uncle had been renting out for a few years after they finished building a new place. It was quiet, a little out of the way, and perfect for what I needed at the time. I spent the first few months living there alone, settling into the space and enjoying the peace. Then, one day, a buddy from work asked me if I was looking for a roommate. I wasn't sure at first, but after thinking it over for a few days, I figured, why not? The place had 2 bedrooms, a den, and even an office built into the garage. Plenty of space for 2 people. The only issue was that the bedrooms were right next to each other, and my friend wanted a little more privacy. So he moved his stuff into the garage office instead. And honestly, it turned out to be a pretty cool setup. Private, quiet, and separate from the main house. Only downside? No bathroom or kitchen in there. So he had to come into the main house to use the kitchen and the washroom. Since we worked different schedules, I'd usually just leave the house unlocked for him. One night, I went to my girlfriend's place for dinner. Nothing out of the ordinary. When I got back, I headed straight to the kitchen, figured I'd relax with a beer from the 6-pack I'd bought the night before. But when I opened the fridge, it was gone. Not one beer, the whole pack. Gone. I felt a wave of irritation flare up. I immediately assumed my roommate had helped himself without asking. Fueled by anger, I stomped out to the garage, didn't knock, didn't hesitate, just slammed the door open. He was asleep. Groggy, confused, he rolled over and blinked at me. I shouted at him, asking why he drank my beer without even bothering to ask. But he just looked up at me, rubbing the sleep from his eyes, and said he hadn't touched it. Didn't even know I had beer in the fridge. Now, I'd been living with him long enough to tell when he was lying. This wasn't one of those times. He seemed completely out of it and genuinely surprised. And that's when the anger started to drain away and something colder crept in. If he didn't take the beer, who did? We both headed back into the house, on edge, checking everything. The TV was still there, furniture untouched, no windows broken. It didn't look like a break-in at all. Then I went into my bedroom, and that's when I noticed my laptop was gone. Not just any laptop, a $2,200 work laptop. Gone. That's when panic set in. We searched the house from top to bottom, every closet, drawer, shelf. Nothing. Even checked outside, just in case. We didn't live completely alone on that property, though. There was another room, kind of an attached suite, that had been built onto the house years ago. My aunt's mother had lived there when she was sick. After she passed away, they'd rented it out to a woman. Strange, quiet, and always acting just a little off. She was still there when we moved in. My aunt and uncle had warned us about her. They suspected she was a drug user, and it didn't take long before we started to believe it too. We'd hear weird sounds coming from her end of the house at all hours of the night. Sometimes voices, sometimes loud crashes, other times just silence, but the kind that felt watched. Then her brother moved in. That raised even more red flags, considering her suite was a 1-bedroom. We figured maybe he just crashed on the couch, but he was off, way worse than her. He wouldn't speak, wouldn't even acknowledge us when we pulled into the driveway and said hello. Just sat outside, chain smoking, staring into nothing. Or maybe staring through things. Through us. My roommate tried making small talk with him once. All he got in return was the guy asking, completely deadpan, if he could score him some drugs. The night of the missing laptop, we were outside trying to figure out what happened when we checked the garage door. And that's when we saw them. Bare footprints. In the snow. They led from her suite's door to our garage. We stood there, staring down at them, our breath turning white in the cold. It was like everything clicked at once. Without even thinking, we stormed up to their door, pounding hard and shouting. We told them we knew what had happened, that we saw the prints, that they better open up. For a second, everything was still. Then someone inside lifted the curtain, just enough for me to see their face. Eyes locked with mine. No expression, no blink. Just staring. It still gives me chills when I think about it. The cops came shortly after. We explained everything, showed them the prints, told them what we knew, gave them the names. They ran the info, came back after a few minutes, and told us something we did not expect. The guy, the woman's brother, had a warrant out for his arrest in another province. And not just any warrant. He'd been convicted of breaking and entering years back. And yet, there was nothing they could do. Because the warrant wasn't local, and since he technically hadn't committed a chargeable crime that night, they couldn't arrest him. They knocked on his door for several minutes, identified themselves as police, but no one answered. Eventually, they left. It was just past 1 a.m. My roommate and I were rattled, but there was nothing more to do that night. We went to bed. There was a door in the house, a connecting door between their suite and the main part of the house. The thing is, it could only be locked from their side. I hadn't thought much of it until I laid in bed that night. And then, sometime after 3 a.m., I heard footsteps, soft, careful, right outside my bedroom door. Then bangs, loud, jarring thuds. Then the doorknob began to shake, not gently, violently, like someone was trying to get in. I wasn't fully awake. My brain was hazy. For a second, I thought maybe it was just my roommate, maybe needing something. So I rolled over and ignored it. But thank God for one thing. I always lock my door at night. Some leftover fear from childhood that I never fully outgrew. And that habit might have saved me. The next morning, I asked him what was so important at 3 a.m. that he had to rattle my door like that. He looked at me blankly, said he slept straight through the night, never even got up to pee. I felt the blood drain from my face. I told him what I heard. We packed up and moved out just a few weeks later. I still don't know what would have happened if that door hadn't been locked. And I don't want to. It happened on my friend's 21st birthday. We threw a huge party for him, one of those chaotic, booze-fueled nights where the house feels more like a bar than a home. The music was blasting, bodies were packed wall to wall, and there must have been over 100 people squeezed into that place. Most of them, total strangers. Even in all the madness, though, one guy stood out. He wasn't drinking, he wasn't talking, he wasn't dancing, just sitting in the far corner of the living room, eyes slowly scanning the crowd. He looked older than anyone else there, much older. Late 40s, maybe 50. Slouched low in his chair, arms crossed, staring. At first, I didn't think much of it. I figured he was someone's dad, or an uncle helping to supervise the party, or maybe just the designated driver for some younger guests. But as the night wore on and the party started to wind down, he stayed. Most of the guests had left. The music had been turned down. Beer bottles and red cups littered every surface. People were cleaning up, yawning, saying goodbye. But the man? Still in the corner, still watching. That's when I asked one of my friends, "Hey, who is that guy?" He glanced over, then looked back at me. "I have no idea." That sent a chill down my spine. We figured we'd wait it out. Maybe once the last guests left, the guy would leave too. And eventually, when the house had gone mostly quiet, we went back to check the living room. He was gone. Relief washed over me. Even though it wasn't my house, just the presence of that man had made me feel uneasy all night. Something about him had felt wrong, off, almost too quiet in a room full of noise. Later, a few of us decided to sleep over. There were just 4 of us left. I took the couch in the den downstairs. I was drunk enough that sleep came quickly. My limbs heavy, thoughts foggy, comforted by the silence that finally settled over the house. But staying asleep? That was a different story. Sometime deep into the night, I woke up, throat dry, stomach twisted. The kind of dehydration that only comes from cheap beer and bad choices. I also needed to pee badly. I sat up, groggy, disoriented, and made my way to the bathroom first. Afterward, I went upstairs to the kitchen and filled a glass with cold tap water. The house was quiet now, eerily so. No humming music, no voices, just the soft creak of the wood under my feet and the gentle ticking of the wall clock. When I came back downstairs and laid back down on the couch, I noticed something. The closet door. There was a sliding door for the coat closet across from the den couch. I hadn't noticed it earlier, but now it was open. Just slightly, only a few inches, but enough to see that someone or something could be watching me from the darkness inside. My skin prickled. I stared, frozen in place, the blood in my veins suddenly cold. And then the thought hit me. The man, the one from earlier, he had been sitting in the shadows all night, watching, silent. Was he still here? Was he hiding in that closet? I laid perfectly still, trying not to breathe too loudly. My eyes locked on the dark gap in the door. My mind spiraled, imagining what could be watching me from inside that sliver of shadow. I began calculating. If I jumped over the back of the couch, I'd land near the stairs. If I made it up, I could reach my friends. But I had to do it fast. I had to commit. Then, the closet door slid open another inch. Just 1 inch. That was it. I bolted. I launched over the couch, heart hammering in my chest, feet hitting the ground with a thud, and sprinted up the stairs like my life depended on it. As I ran, I heard the closet door slide all the way open. And then, footsteps. Fast, heavy. Someone was chasing me. I screamed as I hit the top of the stairs, yelling for my friends to wake up. The three of them shot up on the couches in the living room, confused, staring at me like I was crazy. I spun around at the top of the staircase, waiting. But no one followed. He never came up. My friends were demanding to know what was going on, and I could barely get the words out. I told them the truth, that the man from the party had been hiding in the closet, that he chased me, that he was here. At first, they didn't believe me, and then we all heard it. A door creaking open downstairs, the back door. We froze, eyes locked, no one spoke. After a few seconds of paralyzed silence, one of us grabbed a phone and called the cops. By the time they arrived, the man was long gone, slipped out into the night through the back door. No fingerprints, no forced entry, nothing. He vanished like he was never there. But I know what I saw, and to this day, I can't help but think he didn't come to rob us. He didn't want money. He was just watching and waiting. Back when I was in college in North Carolina, I picked up a part-time job at a local TJ Maxx to help cover some extra expenses. Since my classes took up most of the day, I usually worked the evening shifts. It wasn't ideal, but it paid enough to keep things running. One night, I was wrapping up after closing, probably around 11 or 11:30. The store had a safety protocol for late shifts. All employees left together, and the security guard would stand at the sidewalk to keep an eye on things until everyone reached their cars. It was a small thing, but it made walking out into a dimly lit parking lot feel a bit safer. I was heading to my car alone that night, a few paces behind the others. The lot was mostly empty, quiet, still, with only a few lampposts casting soft yellow light across the rows of vehicles. I was about halfway to my car when I heard the low hum of an engine behind me. A car had pulled up, creeping slowly. I turned around. It was an older model sedan, dark blue or maybe black. It was hard to tell under the parking lot lights. The driver rolled down the window. A woman was behind the wheel, and next to her in the passenger seat was a teenage girl, maybe 15 or 16. The woman gave me a quick, tight smile. "Hey, hon," she called out. "Sorry to bother you. We're from out of town, came to visit family, but we ran out of gas a few blocks back." She spoke fast, too fast. Her tone was high-pitched and oddly rehearsed, like she delivered this exact line many times before. "We don't have any cash on us right now. You think you could help us out with a few dollars, just for gas?" I shook my head and answered honestly, "Sorry, I don't have any cash on me." I didn't. I never carried cash. It was always debit or card. The woman's smile didn't falter, but something changed in her eyes, subtle but sharp. She leaned forward a bit more. "Well, could you maybe just hop in real quick and ride with us to the gas station? You could pay the $10 there and we'll be good." That stopped me cold. I blinked. "No," I said, "I can't do that." She asked again, then again. Every time, the urgency in her voice grew just slightly more insistent, just a hair more desperate. It felt like she was trying to talk me into it before I really had a chance to think. And then I looked over at the girl in the passenger seat. She hadn't said a word. She hadn't even blinked. Her eyes were locked on mine, completely unblinking. Her lips were slightly parted. She was licking them, slow and deliberate, and rubbing her fingers together over and over in small circles, like she was working up a rhythm. That's when it hit me. Something was very, very wrong. I didn't say anything else. I didn't apologize. I didn't try to be polite. I turned and ran. I bolted straight back to the sidewalk where the security guard was still watching the rest of the employees disperse. I could hear the woman calling something behind me, but I didn't turn around. I just ran. As I reached the guard, I glanced back. Their car had been pulled up right behind mine, just close enough that I wouldn't have been able to back out without them moving first. I quickly explained what happened. The guard's expression went tight and serious. Without a word, he turned and began walking toward their vehicle. They didn't wait. The second he got within a few steps of them, the car peeled out of the lot, tires screeching, engine roaring as they disappeared down the street into the dark. No license plate, no names, no follow-up. Just gone. But I'll never forget how calm she was when she asked me to get into that car. And I'll never forget the girl's face, that cold, hollow stare, like she wasn't really there at all. I don't know what they wanted, but I know this. If I'd gotten into that car, I'm not sure I'd be here to tell the story. Working the night shift always sucked. I worked in an office building, typical corporate setup, gray walls, buzzing lights, cold coffee in the break room. The night shift was the only schedule that fit my classes, so I didn't have much choice. I'd be there almost every night, alone, not just on my floor, likely the entire building. There was always this weird atmosphere at night. Being the only person in a place built for hundreds, with most of the lights off, the silence pressing down like a weight, it was eerie, like the building wasn't meant to be experienced that way. But there were upsides. No coworkers breathing down your neck, no constant chatter or phones ringing. Peaceful. Quiet, productive. Still, strange things always seem to happen when the world is quiet. It was a Friday night, around 2 a.m. The hum of the ceiling lights was the only background noise as I typed away at my keyboard, focused on knocking out reports due Monday. I was halfway through a spreadsheet when I heard it. A soft crack, like drywall settling. Not unheard of in a building this size. I paused, glanced around, then shrugged it off and went back to typing. Then came a different sound. A chime. Electronic. Familiar. The distinct boot-up tone of a desktop computer. I froze, fingers hovering over the keys. There was no one else working that night. I knew the schedule, knew the building, knew that no one should have been here but me. I slowly stood on my chair and peered over the cubicle walls. Across the room, dimly glowing in the darkness, was the unmistakable light of a computer screen. It stood out like a spotlight in the pitch-black office. I did something stupid. I raised my voice and called out, "Hello, anyone there?" No answer. Instead, the monitor immediately turned off. Just click. Dark. The room fell back into silence, thick and absolute. My pulse started to rise. I quickly turned off my own desk lamp and computer screen to avoid being seen, heart pounding now in my chest. I ducked down and crept low out of my cubicle, slipping into a nearby workstation to hide. I waited and waited. No footsteps, no movement, just the oppressive silence of a space that suddenly felt too big, too empty, and yet not empty at all. After what felt like an eternity, I decided the coast was clear. I crouched low and slowly made my way down the corridor of cubicles toward the exit that led to the stairwell and elevators. I kept my head down, breath shallow, ears straining for any sound. And that's when I saw him. My heart stopped. Crouched behind a tall decorative plant in the far corner of the open space, a man, dressed in all black, motionless, watching. He hadn't seen me, not yet. I resisted every instinct to run and instead turned slowly toward the stairwell door. I kept my movements casual, deliberate. I opened the door as quietly as I could, slipped inside, and gently closed it behind me. Then I ran. Down 2 flights of stairs, boots thudding, breathing shallow and rapid. Then, above me, the stairwell door burst open hard. The sound echoed violently in the concrete chamber. Footsteps, fast, heavy, getting louder. Whoever was behind me had started running full speed. I didn't look back. I couldn't. I just ran, skipping steps, my hand barely grazing the railing as I tore down floor after floor. Finally, the first floor. I burst through the lobby doors, ran across the empty reception area, and threw open the front entrance into the night air. I didn't stop running until I was well out on the sidewalk under the streetlights. Only then did I look back. No one. The glass doors behind me showed nothing but an empty lobby. I pulled out my phone and immediately called the cops, and then my boss. My boss confirmed what I already knew. No one else was scheduled to work that night. Just me. When the police arrived, they searched the entire building, top to bottom. They found no one. No sign of forced entry. No sign anyone had ever been there. The only thing I could tell them was that the man was wearing all black. No face, no details, just darkness in human shape. I kept working the night shift for 1 more week. After that, my boss let me start locking all access points to our floor. Doors, elevators, everything. I appreciated it. It helped. But it didn't change how I felt. Even with locks, even with cameras, I never felt comfortable again. Eventually, I switched to the day shift. And to this day, I still wonder, Who was in that office with me? And more importantly, what would have happened if I hadn't seen him first? It was 4 a.m. on a Saturday night. I woke up to the unmistakable growl of my stomach, loud, hollow, and persistent. There's nothing worse than trying to fall back asleep while your stomach is empty and twisting. I sighed, tossed off the covers, and made my way groggily to the kitchen to make a sandwich. As soon as I stepped into the kitchen, though, I noticed something that made me pause. The cabinet above the counter was open. Now, most people wouldn't think twice. Maybe they'd chalk it up to sleepiness or forgetfulness and just close it. But I'm not most people. I'm obsessively meticulous, especially when it comes to things like that. I always make sure to close everything I open, always. So to see that door hanging slightly ajar sent a weird jolt down my spine. Something felt off, more off than I could explain. I stood there for a moment, just staring at the cabinet door. Then I slowly began checking the rest of the house. I don't know what I expected to find, maybe nothing, but something in my gut told me I needed to be sure. I moved through the hallway, checking the closets one by one. Each one empty, silent, still. But the air in the house suddenly felt heavier, like the quiet wasn't natural anymore. Then I went down to the den, and that's where everything stopped. The back door was wide open, not cracked, not unlocked, open. Cold air was spilling into the room. The thin curtain by the doorframe fluttered gently in the breeze. My heart sank like a stone. There was no doubt in my mind now. Someone had been in my house, or worse, still was. Still, I don't know what came over me, but I stepped out onto the patio. The porch light clicked on, bathing the yard in a dim yellow glow. And that's when I saw him. A man sitting in one of my patio chairs, just sitting there like he belonged. He turned his head toward me slowly. His face was blank, unreadable, filthy. His hair hung down past his shoulders, greasy and matted. He looked weathered, like someone who had lived outside for years. Homeless, maybe? My mind was racing, trying to process it all, but my body couldn't move. He stood, not fast, not slow, just stood up and began walking toward me. There was something strange about the way he moved, like his body wasn't all connected, like something was off with his rhythm. I still couldn't tell what his intentions were. Maybe he was just confused, maybe lost, maybe dangerous. I should have slammed the door right then, but I didn't. I stood there, frozen, until he lunged. Without thinking, I spun back, slammed the door shut, and threw the lock. The handle jiggled immediately, once, then again, harder. I backed away, And there he was, standing right there on the other side of the glass, staring at me through the door. His face was expressionless, but his eyes didn't blink. We stood there, locked in a silent standoff. 10 seconds, maybe more. I couldn't move, couldn't think. I was trapped in that stare, in that impossible moment. Then it hit me. I should be calling the police. I tore myself away, sprinted into the kitchen, grabbed the phone, and began dialing. My hands were shaking so badly I almost dropped it. I rushed back to the door, ready to report everything. But when I looked, he was gone. Just gone. The chair he'd been sitting in was still there, slightly turned, still rocking faintly in the breeze. But no sign of him. No footprints, no shadow, nothing. I told the cops everything. They came out, checked the yard, walked the perimeter, but, of course, nothing. Whoever that man was, he vanished. I locked every door and window that night, every latch, every bolt. But still, sleep didn't come easy, because I kept thinking, he didn't break in to steal. He didn't take anything. He was just inside. And maybe the cabinet door was never the beginning. Maybe that was just the part I noticed. This is a very weird story. One that still doesn't feel real, even though it happened just a few months ago. The scariest part? I still live in the same house it all happened in. In my bedroom, there's an electrical outlet tucked beneath my bed, just within reach. Every night, I'd plug my phone in down there, then leave it resting on the ledge above my bed to charge. I used it as my alarm clock. Routine, simple. Until something strange started happening. It was a Monday night in February when it began. I jolted awake to the blaring sound of my alarm clock, but the room was still pitch black. I groggily sat up and looked at my old school clock on the desk. 4 a.m. Way too early for my alarm to go off. I rolled over, picked up my phone, and saw that a new alarm had been set. It wasn't one I recognized. The label read, "Down." Weird. I must have messed with it somehow without realizing. I deleted the alarm and went back to sleep, chalking it up to a glitch or maybe a half-asleep mistake. But then came Tuesday night. Once again, I was ripped from sleep by my phone's alarm. The time? 3 a.m. The title of the alarm? Beneath. I sat upright in bed, wide awake now. There was no way I set that. I would have remembered something that strange. The word sent a cold ripple through my chest. Still, I figured it had to be a prank. Maybe my brother was screwing with me. The next morning at breakfast, I told my dad to ask him to knock it off. But my brother swore on his life he hadn't touched it, looked confused, maybe even a little scared. I actually believed him. So that night, I took precautions. I put a password on my phone, wrote it down on a sticky note just in case I forgot, and hid the note behind the wall near the head of my bed, somewhere only I knew. I double-checked my alarms. Only one set, 8 a.m., nothing else. Then I went to sleep. But sure enough, like clockwork, I woke up to the sound of my phone's alarm. 2 a.m. The title? My blood ran cold. Something wasn't right. Someone had to be messing with my phone, hacking it somehow. Or worse, it was someone inside the house. The next day, I turned the phone completely off. No alarms, no battery usage, no possibility of remote control. That night, I went old school, set the alarm on my actual clock, and left the phone untouched. I was exhausted and desperate for a peaceful night. But when I woke up, it was still dark and quiet. My desk alarm clock had turned off completely, but my phone, it was back on the ledge above my bed, and it was ringing. Only this time, it wasn't the normal chime. It was a distorted, screeching sound, something mechanical, like a scream played backwards through a broken speaker. My skin prickled at the noise. I grabbed the phone. The time? 1 a.m. The alarm title? Bed. That's when it hit me. Down, beneath the bed. The 4 alarms, one each night, they weren't random. They were a sentence, a warning. I froze. Slowly, I reached down to grab the charging cable like I always did, feeling around under the bed. Only this time, it wasn't there. The charger was gone. And then I felt it. Fingers, cold, thin fingers wrapped around my wrist. They squeezed tight. My stomach dropped. I screamed louder than I've ever screamed in my life, thrashing and trying to pull my arm back. The grip tightened. Then I heard movement, footsteps racing down the hall. My bedroom door burst open. My dad holding a baseball bat. His eyes went wide when he saw what was happening. I was half hanging off the side of the bed, being pulled down. Without hesitation, he lunged forward, dropped to his knees, and reached under the bed. He grabbed something. Someone. A man. There was a violent struggle. The bat came down hard. A thud. Another. My dad pinned the guy until the police arrived minutes later. The man had been hiding under my bed for 4 days. He didn't even try to run. The police later told us he was a registered sex offender, arrested 10 times before. He was extremely disturbed, known for stalking his victims, known for breaking into homes, known for watching. He didn't just break in to hurt anyone right away. He wanted to play. He got into my phone, set the alarms, left clues, waited and watched. And he was under my bed, listening while I slept inches above him. What chills me most is how close I was to ignoring all of it. If I hadn't paid attention to those alarms, if I hadn't screamed when I did, I might not be here to tell this story. Now I can't sleep without checking under the bed every night because I learned something terrifying. Sometimes the monsters aren't imaginary. They're right beneath you, and they know your name. The most horrifying experience I've ever lived through didn't even happen to me. It happened to my best friend. We'll call him Ty. He and I were close, texting daily, hanging out whenever we could. It didn't matter what we were doing, we just clicked. So when he didn't respond to any of my messages one day, no replies to my texts, no calls back, I knew something was off. At first, I figured maybe he was just busy. But as the hours passed, that feeling in my gut started to grow. Something didn't sit right. By early evening, I couldn't take it anymore. I walked over to his house, just a block away. His car was parked in the driveway, same spot as always. I knocked, rang the bell, waited, nothing. No answer. That was really weird. I stood there a while, debating whether to keep knocking, but I couldn't shake the feeling he was inside, hiding, wanting to be left alone. Eventually, I gave up and walked home, figuring I'd try again the next day. But that night, well after midnight, I got a FaceTime call from an unknown number. I hesitated. Cautiously, I answered, angling the camera away from my face, just in case. A second later, a familiar face appeared on the screen. It was Ty. Relief washed over me. I turned the camera toward myself, about to scold him for scaring me, until I got a better look at his face. He looked different, worn down, pale. His eyes darted nervously, like he hadn't slept in days. There was a kind of twitchy energy to him, paranoia radiating through the screen. And the room behind him wasn't his. It was dark, unfamiliar, the paint chipped and flaking from the walls. "Where are you?" I asked. "Why weren't you answering your phone?" "I'm fine," he said quickly. "I'm at home." That was clearly a lie. I frowned. Whose phone is this? He stared into the camera and stared. His silence stretched on for an uncomfortably long time, his face blank, eyes flicking away as if someone was watching him. Finally, he answered, "My uncle's." That made zero sense. I knew his uncle didn't live nearby. The way he said it, too, flat, detached, it wasn't convincing. Before I could press him further, he suddenly leaned forward, voice hushed but sharp. "Can you send me $10,000? I'll pay you back, please." I blinked, stunned. I laughed awkwardly. "Are you joking? What's going on?" But he wasn't smiling. He looked terrified, dead serious. His expression was filled with fear, something deeper, desperate. "Ty, what's going on?" Another long pause. He just stared again. The silence was heavy. Then he said he had to go, and the call ended before I could ask another question. I sat there, phone in my lap, completely unsettled. I'd never seen him like that. He wasn't just acting weird, he was scared. And someone was clearly with him. I couldn't sleep. The next morning, I was at his house again by 9 a.m., ringing the bell like a madman, over and over. Still nothing. His car was still there, no movement inside. After a while, I gave up. If he wanted to act shady, fine. I didn't know what to make of it anymore. I felt helpless, angry, afraid. But that night, again, around the same time, I got another FaceTime call. Another unknown number. My heart sank. I picked up. It was Ty again, only this time he looked even worse. His hair was a mess. He had a visible cut on his forehead. His face was pale, sickly, and the bags under his eyes were so deep they looked bruised. He barely looked like himself. I kept asking what was happening, where he was, who was with him, but he wouldn't say. He just kept begging, pleading for me to send $10,000 to some random address. I told him no, again and again. I didn't even have that kind of money. Then, suddenly, his eyes darted sideways, off camera. He froze. His voice shook. "Come on," he said, so quietly I almost didn't hear it. "Don't point a gun at my back." My blood turned to ice. There was a subtle twitch in his left eye, a tiny movement that I couldn't help but interpret as a wink. And then the call cut out. I stared at my screen in shock. Then, out of nowhere, it hit me. I remembered the address he'd mentioned in passing during the call. I didn't waste a second. I called the cops. It turned out to be an old, abandoned house, miles away, on a deserted block where nobody lived anymore. When police arrived, they found Ty in the basement. Barely alive, bruised, beaten, bleeding, but alive. They said he was conscious when they got to him. He'd been tied up. Whoever did it was already gone, vanished without a trace. All they left behind was the wreckage. Later, much later, Ty told me just one thing. He'd been walking home. Then, everything went black. When he woke up, he was chained to a pipe in the basement of that house. He doesn't like to talk about the rest, but I think about it all the time. About how he wasn't asking me for help. He was screaming for it, but couldn't say it directly. And if I hadn't answered, if I hadn't remembered that address, he wouldn't have made it.